is The Opinions, a show that brings you a mix of voices from New York Times opinion. You've heard the news. Here's what to make of it.
I'm Patrick Healy, deputy editor of New York Times Opinion, and this is The First 100 Days, a weekly series examining President Trump's use of power and his drive to change America. This week, I want to dig into Trump's unique approach to power, and especially to controlling people and events in his second term, compared to the chaos of his first. And there's no better person to do that with than my colleague, Maureen Dowd. She's known Trump for decades. Maureen, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Patrick.
So, Maureen, I wanted to start off with your column about Trump's inaugural speech last week, because I really think it defines this presidency so far. You wrote about how Trump was seen as a clown, as a dilemma by some in his first term, but now he's a master and commander of the entire fleet, that he's just really in control like we've never seen him before. Do you think this is real with Trump, or is it a performance in terms of this sense of absolute power, absolute control that he's trying to project?
Well, I think when he was first president, the last go-round, he was trying to color within the lines a little bit in the sense that he was trying to play the Washington game, but now that's all gone.
Yeah, I mean, Nixon had his Saturday Night Massacre, and the system reacted to that, and Trump fired all these inspector generals, and there's this question like, was it legal? Was it illegal? And we're all kind of looking at each other wondering like, what was it?
Well, part of it, I think that after the assassination attempt, the language at the convention and in the inaugural speech was ratcheted up to be more like he's a divine creature. The one thing you really don't want to do with extreme narcissists is give them everything they want, give them all the attention they want, because then you are inviting a narcissistic explosion of unparalleled force, which is what I think we're heading for. But also the visuals of the inaugural were very disturbing. You know, a friend of mine who is a wealthy Hollywood type called me and said, oh my God, now this country is all about money. And this guy is a billionaire, but he's worried about the visuals of what Biden warned was an oligarchy. But the tech guys, the inaugural speech was like Versailles with the, I'm not going to pronounce this right, despite my 4 years of Latin, puer aeterni. Do you know that expression? It means eternal boys, which is what the Silicon Valley guys are. So at the convention, he had Dana White and Hulk Hogan. It was like the macho wrestling vibe. And then in the inaugural speech, he had a different kind of boys club, the Silicon Valley boys who play with their toys. And before, their toys were rockets and robots and self-driving cars, and they would compete with each other and have dinner in Palo Alto once a week to make sure somebody didn't have one of these toys that they didn't have. And then they were looking at Trump like, here's our new toy. But Trump is looking at them like they're his new toys.
Absolutely.
So I wouldn't say, you know, he's not aware of this.
And he loves it, Maureen. I mean,
he
like
loves it. Because he always wanted the love of the elites, and he still does.
Totally.
You know, one of his top advisors told us, you and me, during the convention, that he was most thrilled after the assassination attempt that Mark Zuckerberg called him a badass and got in touch with him. And
after so many years of giving him the cold shoulder.
Yeah, and the liberal-leaning Silicon Valley has now blossomed into Trump country, and Zuckerberg was fed up with liberals lecturing him, and 2016 was his fault. And, you know, as his friends in Silicon Valley said, he was just like, okay, that's enough. I'm buying a yacht. I'm not fact-checking. And he kind of went full-blown Trumpy.
Trump's hunger for being worshipped is so related to his conception of power. And you and I both remember that convention, how much people were treating him, you wrote about this, as like the resurrected Trump. Like God saved him to do something for America. And Maureen, for a little while, I thought, oh, Trump is kind of in on the joke. Like he knows that people are believing this and it works for him. But at a certain point, I started wondering, does he believe this himself? I mean, he talked about that at the inauguration.
It suits him because he always ran Trump Tower in a monomaniacal way. One of his biographers said that what would happen to Trump eventually would be he would be distilled to his essence. You know, a phrase that really scares me. But I think that's what we're seeing. You know, I think we forget that Trump didn't have celebrities the first time around. They were repelled by him, and he didn't have any of this respect that he has now. You know, it was a very kind of pariah first 100 days.
Oh, yeah,
and there was
B-list,
a huge
C-list,
pink resistance. And Democrats are just flatlining. They still don't know what hit them or how they're going to get out of the wilderness. And so Trump has a clear highway and he is speeding down it.
If Trump was distilled to his essence, what would that essence be?
Well, that's what I think we're going to see.
We're really going to see it.
Somebody, right? I was interviewing Martin Short last night on a different topic, and he said something so funny. I said, what do you think of Trump so far? And he goes, it's like the second act of Cabaret.
Oh, no.
I knew you would love that.
You
Pat.
thought the first act was dark. The second act is really dark. That's perfect.
Also, SNL was interesting. I was there Saturday night again working on a story in the studio. And it's very interesting to see how they portray Trump because it's a little bit like how they portrayed W, which they think helped W to win.
That's right, state of Florida. Read my mouth. I am the president of the United States.
You know, it's critical in a way. It shows him as a blowhard, but in a way, he comes across kind of cool.
You could not kind of love him?
Yeah,
like,
and Will
relate?
Ferrell has a lot of, tormented feelings about that.
I was a theater reporter back then. I interviewed Will Ferrell when he brought the George W. Bush show to Broadway, and he really had torn feelings about that.
Right.
How SNL makes these really problematic figures in our politics and our culture into just more likable people.
Well, Lorne Michaels' theory is that even the biggest villains have to have a drop of humanity. And also, he doesn't believe in bringing your biases in, but then most of the cast members are very liberal, and they do believe in that.
Yeah.
So there's always that tension. But there was a great story also in New York Magazine by Brock Collier, who went around to young Republicans' parties. And there's this unbelievable picture with it of all these glamorous young white, They
were very white, Maureen.
Very white. And they say that conservatives now are urban and online. And, I remember this I did the story on how young men in college were deciding Reagan was cool. And that was a shock to the democratic system when that happened.
Reagan was such a cultural force for the Republican Party. He was going to take on the evil empire. He was going to stare them down. He was that golden figure from California who was going to make America proud again. How do you see Trump as like a cultural figure right now? Have we figured that out?
Yeah, Reagan, when I interviewed these young college kids, they loved that great paternal figure. And then with Trump, there's much more of a threat. And Mel Gibson on Fox the other night said,
it's like daddy arrived and he's taking his belt off,
And I don't know if your parents were like that, but my dad actually did take his belt off.
Oh, yeah.
He never did anything about it.
No, but the threat was there. The fear was the point,
right.
Maureen, I thought what SNL got really right about Trump and culture and power last weekend was that sense of here's a scene with the founding fathers.
And we will have leaders, but know one thing. In America, we will never have a king.
And in strides Trump.
Never say never. Kidding.
kidding, of course, though in many ways I'm not. I'm in my...
This sort of colossus, godlike figure out of time who's making it ultimately all about him. And I thought your take on the inaugural speech really got at this. You really identified these three words that struck you when Trump said, "Here I am, here I am." And that totally took me back. You and I both went to Catholic school, and it took me back to learning about Yahweh presenting himself to the Israelites. It all had a real Old Testament vibe to it. Here's the thing. Does Trump know what he's doing? Does this come out of some desire of his to play God with America? Or do you think he's still just kind of making it up as he goes along?
Yeah, the "here I am" was like a promise and a threat, which he is now fulfilling. Well, I thought the SNL thing, what they got about him, which the Democrats never did, was that he is not seen as so threatening or scary because he is joking around a lot. So that makes the threat less potent. I think that the SNL caricature gets the fact that he's doing things that are very authoritarian and that eventually the public may turn on. But because he has this jokey manner, they don't think it's that scary, the people who support him.
It's one of the strangest things, Maureen, about the Democrats with Trump for the last 10 years. They don't understand that Trump is a very American type. He's someone who's never taken things too seriously. It's like wearing life as like a loose garment, so to speak. And he loves nothing more than to drive Democrats crazy with his sense of humor. Now, I'm not saying that people should not be worried about Trump at all or take Trump seriously, but they've always missed that that's part of his appeal to a lot of just regular Americans.
Right. He's played into a beloved American archetype, which is the con man. We saw in Huckleberry Finn and Music Man, but we've never had the con man as president. That's what's so jarring.
Yeah.
It's always been a great side character in the American narrative, but not as president.
That's not.
And again, with Trump, I think the fact that he has this jokey, goofy affect makes a lot of people think he's not really going to do stuff, but he's already scaling back on abortion rights and reversing some protections Biden had put in place. And I've interviewed him for a long time, and I asked him once, I said, "You were a big playboy in New York. Did you ever have to pay for an abortion for one of your girlfriends?" And there was this long pause. And then he just went, "Maureen, you're funny." He never answered the question, but he was pro-choice. And this is just something he's doing in a Faustian deal with evangelical Christians, his abortion position.
Maureen, a lot of Americans adored Reagan and Obama like a god, and Dick Cheney liked to play God with the world. As Trump returns to D.C. as this colossus you've written about, does he remind you of anyone? Like, is there anything from history and your time covering different presidents that's like useful to keep in mind about these kind of moments?
I don't know. I got my degree in English literature, my master's degree from Columbia a couple years ago. And I took a course in Greek mythology, which I love. And the White House now is reminding me of the Greek gods because they were so cruel and capricious. And none of what they did made sense a lot of times. And it was all totally narcissistic and selfish. And so I think that's the kind of administration we're watching.
Trump makes these declarations about what gender is. He talks about the dishonor of trans people in the military. And certainly what we're seeing about immigration, it does feel like the cruelty is the point with a lot of this.
Well, it was funny. I was talking to someone we know, a Brit, recently about this. And I said, what surprises me about Trump is that Americans are willing to accept his cruelty. And I said, I don't think that's in the American nature. And he goes, have you ever read about the 18th century? Americans were rapacious and cruel. So that was the British point of view. But I think that Trump has the runway he has because Democrats got on the side of a lot of issues that it's just incomprehensible looking back. As James Carville said, defund the police, the 3 stupidest words in the English language. A lot of things that, as Trump calls it, common sense, but they were common sense things. I just think that Democrats lost sight of where most Americans are.
It was one of the most stunning things about Biden and Harris in that first term. Just talking to voters who come to our Times Opinion focus groups and just being out with you in Iowa and New Hampshire, people would just be like, why can't Democrats just say what's real? Why can't
but
they
also,
just look at this?
there was a backlash to Me Too, which blended into it. I was struck by your recent focus group on Trump because, they think he's masculine. And our earliest focus groups, I remember talking to Nate Cohen. I said, what is the main thing people are saying about Trump back in 2015? And he said that he has balls. So this is something that matters to voters. And obviously men had felt displaced in the society and like they couldn't say anything or do anything right. And Democrats have to really think about what they did to make this happen.
Do you see anyone on the DC landscape or the political landscape willing to stand up to Trump or sending signals? Even the Democrats don't seem to be all on the same page about how to even deal with Trump. But are you seeing anything at this point in terms of anyone standing up to Trump?
The Democrats, to me, just seem flatlining. A friend of mine in Hollywood just said, our whole mantra now is delete, delete, delete. They don't want to hear about politics. They don't want to form a resistance. They don't want to know. They're just, ostriches. There doesn't seem to be any plan of how to move forward. And in a way, it's sad because they're still reacting to Trump. That's how they lost in 2016. And they are doing everything just in reaction to him rather than coming up with their own vision. Democrats just lost all the fun, all the inspirational mojo that they've had sometimes over the years.
Maureen, Trump has played so effectively on the fear that people have, people's fears in America on the economy, immigration, but now he has to govern. Can Trump govern just on fear, on keeping people afraid, on making people bend the knee? Or at some point, does he have to do something beyond emotion?
I don't know. I remember once writing a line about Bill Clinton saying his personality had been raised to a management style because he would have all-night bull sessions and order pizza when they were trying to pass a bill. And all presidents do that to a certain extent. But basically, Trump has subsumed the idea of governing with his personality. It's just about him and his id, and that's it. And it's not going to be governing in the way that we know it. I mean, Susie Wiles, I guess, has imposed some discipline, but I don't think anyone can impose discipline on Trump. He always manages to elude them and get back to his narcissistic explosion.
He totally does. Maureen, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Patrick.
If you like this show, follow it on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. This show is produced by Derek Arthur, Sophia Alvarez-Boyd, Vishaka Durba, Phoebe Lett, Christina Samuelewski, and Jillian Weinberger. It's edited by Kari Pitkin, Allison Bruzek, and Annie Rose Strasser. Engineering, mixing, and original music by Isaac Jones, Sonia Herrero, Pat McCusker, Carol Saburo, and Afim Shapiro. Additional music by Amen Sahota. The The fact-check team is Kate Sinclair, Mary Marge Locker, and Michelle Harris. Audience strategy by Shannon Busta, Christina Samuelewski, and Adrian Rivera. The executive producer of Times Opinion Audio is Annie Rose Dresser.